science is the highest achievement of human civilization. That it's collective. It comes from all of our past, and it's like we lost so much information along the way due to a lot of reasons. We can talk about the colonialism and all that stuff. I'm happy to, but I will try to keep this simplistic. It's the highest achievement of human civilization, and when you're passing down that knowledge, like whatever the means of passing down that knowledge, you have to be careful. I think that's how I feel.
I definitely think that when I think about what would improve science communication as a whole, a lot of it comes to responsibility, as Ivo mentioned, ethical communication. And I think, unfortunately, whether academic research scientists or otherwise,
Okay. I don't know why that's happening. I think I'm just gonna have to go with this because I'd rather have my camera there. Well, he doesn't have a video. I don't know what to do here. Okay, let's just go for it. It is what it is. I don't know what's going on, why this is happening, but let's just go for it.
researchers doing science communication. And that has been, science communication is explaining scientific concepts to an audience so that they understand. And I would challenge that that is a legitimate form of purpose of science communication. But to me, science communication isn't just about communicating concepts to an audience so that they understand. It is about communicating the problems within science as a sector and as a knowledge system and as institutions to the public, and demanding a better science sector and systems. To me, science communication is not just about encouraging people to go into formal science careers, although that's definitely the purpose for some organisations in SciComm, that's their remit. But it's also about how do we make a community of science-minded public, and how do we make not only people trust science, because I actually hate that phrase, but how do we make science trustworthy? That's one of the things that I think would make science communication better. I actually think more social science training for people in science is sorely needed. Less academic elitism from people in science is needed, so that even when they have the opportunity to learn from social scientists, they don't ignore them or dismiss them as not real scientists. As someone who's done the science degree and the social science degree at the same time, I actually observe that my peers in science could learn a lot more from social scientists than the other way around. I'm happy to just stake my life on that. And that's not because scientists don't have a lot to teach social scientists, but I think we need to get over this academic elitism within science, and science could get a lot further if we did. So I think a lot of SciComm, actually, and SciCommers are standing in our own way if we want to become better science communicators.
So let me go ahead and briefly interlude here. We're joined by a new panelist. I don't know if you want me to use your actual like Twitch username, or if you're just cool with Greg. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm good with Greg. It's okay. I have a YouTube channel, The Peer Review. I have an ecology and evolution background in my undergrad. I did some research in algae biofuels there. Then I worked at a plant biotechnology company, and now I'm a PhD candidate for microbiology. So I thought the panel's been going great. I totally agree with everything that's been said. I think like the requirement for actually outreaching is really interesting. Like I think there should be some kind of component within publications. Like, you should have to try to communicate your science a little bit better, because right now it seems very like you were saying, like ivory tower-ish, kind of like elitist. Like, we publish the papers, so now you need to figure it out, rather than using these, like YouTube and Twitch and stuff. Like, Science and Nature and Cell, they have YouTube channels, but they just kind of put out 2-minute little things rather than actually communicating ideas.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I like one way that comes to mind to like integrate that requirement for communication. Yeah, there could be some sort of like, outreach component that's required for, a laboratory on a yearly basis. If they're getting grant funding from the government, for example, they have to demonstrate that they've gone out to X place, a local high school or something like that. Because that's something my old lab used to do. We used to go and talk to a bunch of like high school juniors and seniors, and just shoot the breeze about science. That's really all it was at the end of the day. It was just seeing what questions they had to sort of help them understand more about like what's science like, what do we do on a day-to-day basis. And Constantine, I think something like that, among other things, of course, would help like foster that sort of like science mindedness, that sort of science conscious way of thought in the public, where they're more aware of just like what happens in science in the first place. So I think I want to bring up the notion of credentialism, because that was the back half of that question in chat. Do we think a good science communicator, or just any science communicator, should have academic credentials under their belt, or is that not required? What do you guys think?
I think real life. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I mean, I thought like Constababble, what you were talking about when you like got into science based off of your own like lived experience and stuff in the drought. I think that you can't discount that, even if someone isn't credentialed. I think that someone's real world lived experience is important.
I think in that sense, this also connects to our discussion on elitism, right? Like, I think, like, if someone is already science-minded and they might know a lot about the science itself, but they might just choose not to be a scientist. Like that's possible. Or they might be really knowledgeable. They could have become a scientist, but they couldn't because of the like all of the socioeconomic backgrounds and stuff, right? Like this is like we shouldn't like think those people don't know anything or any like something. There are, I'm pretty sure there are people who without a biology degree who would be, let's say, more knowledgeable than I am in Darwin's work. Like I'm talking about like a specific part of the history of science, right? Like Darwin's work. So like there might be people who without any degree having all that knowledge. So are we saying that these people's knowledge is not important? I don't think that's I don't think there should be a title, but like someone like when you have the knowledge, I think it shows, when you have the knowledge versus when you don't have the knowledge, it kind of shows. I can give you the best example, but like this all comes down to saying the fact that if the public is science-minded or not, because if the public is not science-minded, they will not be able to judge if someone has the knowledge or they're just bullshitting. Like the example of Jordan Peterson. Like like the guy. Yeah, but his arguments are like contradicting to himself all the time, and people think he's just genius. This is because the public is not science minded. That I think, like they don't have the toolkit to combine the logical sequence of the thought to see that, oh, this is contradicting. I think that's really important. And like, how can we achieve that? I don't know. I really don't have a good answer for that one right now.
I've been making notes, but
Well,
I don't
here-
know if you're ready.
Uh-oh.
Let's go.
I've been making notes. I hear what you both say, and I agree, but I also think it's quite typical of an academic scientist perspective. Not in a bad way, but I think the fact that that means it's part of the picture. So one thing I will say is that, you know, we're talking about people being less knowledgeable. Just because someone's less knowledgeable doesn't mean they have less impact. And that's part of the problem. Joe Rogan, for example. You don't need a degree to spread mass misinformation. So I don't think you need a degree to spread mass good information. That doesn't mean that it's that having people with formal education and people without that in the mix together isn't important. And that doesn't mean that it's, I heard there's no such thing as a wasted education. I don't know who said it, but I agree. So I think that's important. We also need to, as science communicators, recognize when we personally are not the best person to communicate on this, even if we know all the information. And sometimes that comes down to things like, you know, maybe communicating with vaccine hesitant mothers. I don't have any children. I have a lot of information to share. I even have a lot of knowledge about a lot of good strategies for talking to anti-vax communities from reading all the research on it. Not all the research, there's too much. I haven't read it all. Don't hold me to that standard. But at the end of the day, is my place as a science communicator more about communicating with potential in-group advocates and communicators who don't necessarily have the formal education I do, but would be great communicators. And that comes back to expanding our imagination and understanding of what science communication looks like and can be. Because science communication isn't just about us as people with knowledge doing the communicating to a group or audience. It can be about us communicating with someone who would be better placed to be a communicator than us. I think that's undervalued because actually we get a lot of career opportunities, kudos, attention to our work from being the ones in the public eye. And we need to remember that that doesn't necessarily, just because it's the most popular, doesn't necessarily make it the most impactful. So there's a lot of really great SciComm, and I want to emphasize this since we've been talking about SciComm. If you are an introvert who doesn't want to have your face out there and doesn't want to talk to an audience, even if it's 10 people or 50, you can still do SciComm. And that might be communicating between people from different disciplines. It might be communicating with community members who are actually better communicators. For example, you know, I know there's a lot of research in the pandemic on communicating vaccine information to culturally and linguistically diverse people, so migrants, to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, to people whose first language isn't English, to religious groups. And that was all about getting people who don't have the degree and forming relationships with them. That isn't one way, just about giving them the information to tell their communities, but is about listening to them and hearing from them. What is it your community needs? Where are the gaps? Where are we not catering to the people who you're connected to that are not? So I think that's really important. One thing I also want to challenge quickly, knowing that I'm on a rant, is the concept of science literacy and science-minded and education of our community to make them more science literate, more critical thinking, more science-minded, so that they can tell that Joe Rogan's talking rubbish. There is no real definition for science literacy. It's a fuzzy term, and science itself is not about knowing a bunch of facts anyway. So even if there was a way to measure it, we'd find that there'd be professors who would fail the test, even though they're very scientifically literate, just because they are literate in their particular areas. and ways of doing science. So it's very hard to measure and define. But the other thing is, I think we forget that us as scientists, because we're human, are also just as irrational potentially as the audiences that we wish to communicate with. And sometimes that actually prevents us from being better science communicators, because we reject new information that doesn't sit with our predefined idea of what good science communication looks like or should be. So that's not really like a counter argument to what was said, but more of an add-on for us all to think about is there such a thing as science literacy? If there was such a thing as literacy in that sense for something like science, I would argue that if we only had time to do one, I would make everyone more social science literate. And then if they want to learn physical and natural sciences, they can get up to speed on that, because I think being a better person would go a long way. But that's my hot take.
Yeah, so I mean, those are pretty good perspectives. I want to come back to the definition of science literacy, but there's one question I want to ask everybody, and this is kind of because I like to say things with my chest a lot of the time. I'm kind of a quasi-formal believer in, like, it's okay to do a little bit of shit talking as a treat. So I want this next question to be posed to everybody. Your most favorite and least favorite science communicator. I can give mine at the end, but I don't want to take away any good answers from anyone.
If it's me, lie.
Oh no!
If I'm your least favorite, lie.
I mean, there's so many people that you have to choose from for
You're
least
not
favorite. You're not on the list. I can definitely say that much. Evo, you've been on Twitch for a while. Who do you not like for science communication? Not on the platform.
So okay, I will not give name. Like I think I will give styles. I think that will be like I don't think they, like, you know, like in names it would just go. I think it's too much targeting. Instead we can target the methods that could be more constructive, right? Like I don't like personally just a science hype. I think science hype is like we have, okay, science is beautiful, it's great, but it has also problems, right? Like, you know, like being honest is really important. So I would say the science hype people are my least favorite type of science communicators, and my favorite type of science communicators are people, I think, as Constable points out, like the people who connects the issues with social ones and brings like the physical sciences, biological sciences, and connects those, like the issues we are talking with the social issues we have, and like bringing solutions to the table, bringing change and like real progress to the table. I think those people are my favorite people. So that's how I can say. I don't know.
Yeah, my favorite science communicator is probably David Attenborough. Yeah, because I think I'm a biologist, and just observationally, you know, I was going to bed watching a Planet Earth episode a night, and you know, it's so impactful, and watching those documentaries is incredible. And now he's been doing it long enough that he can actually go back and we can see with our own eyes, you know, with the absolute destruction and collapse of the environment that's happening right now. My least favorite science communicators would have to just be the people that are pushing disinformation, that actually have the degrees, and then they go out. So this is like Americans Frontline Doctors people, where they literally just go around and purposely change what it is, and then say what it is, even though they know that's not the case, but it fits their narrative. So now they're pushing it. So like, for example, I was going over one of their videos, and the guy was talking about like, this is human lungs that have been injected with the vaccine, and this is the damage that's happening. So then I look I read the actual paper, and the actual paper, of course, is a dissection of a pseudovirus with SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. So it's not the vaccine, it's not even humans, it's rats or mice, I forget. And it's just like, man, you just had to read it. You took the figure out of place, and it's so, because the problem is people see that and then they think that, oh, this guy's done his research, so I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna go with it. I'm gonna spread that to other people, and it's so dangerous.
Consta, what's your answer to that question?
Well, I love the answers so far, but to add a different one, because I don't want to echo something that's already. I'll be a bit spicy and say, I'm sick of listening to Space Boys. Done with it. Shut up, Space Boys. There, I said it. No, but I get why Space Boys are popular, why space is like, whoa, blowing my mind. But also I'm like, stay in your lane and stop talking about how you can cure cancer with your astrophysics, please.
If I have to watch another BBC documentary about how there's like 13 dimensions or something, I swear.
And honestly, it is, they've got an audience, and that's great. If that's your thing, good. But just as a personal, shut up, Space Boys. I have so many favorite individual science communicators, but to shout one out specifically, Dr. Ronx, RONX. They are an amazing emergency doctor in the UK. This is also someone who I guess I've looked up to because I was trying to look for awesome examples. Like when I used to do science TV, and I was like, who's out there who does science TV, who isn't a space boy I don't want to listen to? And Dr. Ronx is one of the hosts from a BBC show for kids called Operation Ouch, where they talk about their bodies and health and things like that. But they are also a huge advocate and a huge outspoken spokesperson for talking about marginalized people in the community at large, as well as medicine, whether that be Black people or non-binary people, of which Dr. Ronx is both, or anyone in between. I think Dr. Ronx has also been a great communicator through the pandemic, is always someone who gives big ups to other people as well, and is really just community-minded and a great, funny, hilarious person.
Hey, those are pretty good answers. I'm actually very happy about the fact that I've never heard about Space Boys. So to hear you say that and to see my chat being like, yes, finally somebody said something about Space Boys, I'm like, all right, I'm never looking at that. Never, not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
I didn't know it was a phrase, but maybe it is now.
I mean, if it isn't, it should be. I think at the rate they're allegedly going. Yeah, I guess at least for me, one of my recent favorites since the start of COVID has been a Canadian virologist, Angie Rasmussen, simply because, again, I'm kind of a firm believer in talking shit, and she's not afraid to just go onto Twitter and talk thinly veiled shit about other people who are doing tangible harm. She'll call out the Joe Rogans, she'll call out the Vinay Prasads, the Marty McArees, all of the typical COVID conspiracy theorists, especially the ones with credentials. She'll at them, she'll subtweet them, she'll certainly speak her mind, and she does it all with backing it up with actual science and evidence. So that's kind of what I appreciate, because it feels like a lot of scientists don't necessarily feel that sort of fight to really advocate and defend the data and the consensus. Sort of in that same vein, my least favorite, the one and only Eric Feigl Ding, the sheer mention of that guy's name triggers me. I literally saw him on the Mehdi Hassan show, which I'll be watching after Ministry of Science, with Peter Hotez, who's an angel. Peter Hotez has earned 5 spots in heaven himself, and he knows more than just about any of us because he's been developing vaccines for years. Literally on the same screen, you have Eric Feigl Ding streaming from his closet as a PhD epidemiologist in nutrition with no infectious disease knowledge whatsoever. The man who literally said we should wear N95 underwear and COVID is actually airborne AIDS. How does anybody let him on their show? I don't get it.
Should we? Mine's cotton. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, according to him, COVID farts are abound, so you may want to be careful.
I mean, yeah, I heard it can get around in poo particles, but I didn't think
Yeah.
it was as big an issue.
That's how they,
I mean, I
they
guess-
trace community spread and stuff sometimes. But the amount of grifters and charlatans are just abound because of the pandemic. It's just absolutely a huge problem because you can have people going on that sound like they're talking about like Robert Malone or something like that. Like the dude does lipid nanoparticle delivery of RNA of GFP in 1990 or something, and now he's the inventor of vaccines. That's like saying like Henry Ford, because he invented the personal car, also invented the F1 race cars that are coming out this year. It's like, come on, it's not true at all. It's completely different. There's a lot of research that's happening. Yeah, it's really sad.
Well, so here, let me kind of take this and run with it then, because I think part of SciComm too is now we sort of have almost this like adversarial relationship with people that we know to be bad faith actors. Those people, the grifters and charlatans, and they in due time will sort of make themselves evident as such, whether it's COVID or climate change or any other scientific issue. How do we communicate around them? What are the strategies that we should employ to deal with them? Do we simply sort of focus on the science, the data, sort of talk to the room, make sure people are more aware of sort of the correct information? Do we deplatform? Do we talk a bunch of shit? All of the above, other stuff? What do you guys think are the best strategies to sort of combat the disinformation spreading?
I mean, I personally think that you combat it by debating them straight on. So the biggest problem, like with Robert Malone, and stuff like that, is you basically have a YouTube algorithm that's pushing people into anti-vax viewpoints, right? So they're watching something that's like from the BBC or something about vaccine quality, or and then the next video, because it's going to be a hate watch algorithm, is going to be some anti-vax thing with Robert Malone. Or like, let's say you're Google searching Robert Malone, and now all these videos come up and it's just him talking. I think people that are questioning or are on the fence are more likely to watch a video that has him being like debating. Robert Malone and Topol would be an amazing debate. Oh my, I'd love to see that, and like, let's see it. Let's see, like, and have these people at least show up in the search terms, because it's not like a deplatforming argument, I feel like, because those ideas are already getting out there. They're already being spread. So I feel like you have to touch them where they're having the most impact, which is in the search terms, which is in the algorithms, and just like fight it there.
The only thing I'd caution against is the public debate. And that's because of the learnings of the climate science community on that. Throughout the 90s and noughties, public debate on is it real or not was really a popular thing on mainstream news and things like that. And that brought public understanding and acceptance of climate science backwards instead of forwards. And that's something I really think sounds like a good solution, but false balance, unfortunately, is the outcome's not great. And a lot of people in the media who want to do those things will say, we're just showing you the two sides and then you can make up your own mind. But if we have to make up our own mind, sometimes the community on the receiving end does, and it doesn't go the way we want. But I do think that tackling their arguments and making it known, this is why it's not right, whether that's through social media or popular media, is really important. I think we need better media regulations, so that these views are not shown as if they're equal representatives of the truth. Because I think people talk about political correctness gone wild or whatever, and quite often they're just talking about consequences for things. But if I was going to say something is political correctness gone wild, it's the idea that all ideas deserve a platform And I think that's one of the reasons why the Joe Rogans get supported by Spotify, because that's literally what the Spotify CEO kind of said, was that they want diverse perspectives. But if we had better regulations, better laws that actually had teeth for whether it was formal journalists, mainstream media, companies like Spotify, even social media websites potentially, depending on the size of the platform. You don't need to go after every individual who's a dingus and has 5 followers. But I think, if we had better regulations and better standards for fact checking and for not spreading misinformation in the mass media, I think we would go a lot further. So I think really we need to remember that when the question is, how do we communicate around them? And we definitely need to navigate that and talk about that. But we need to remember we shouldn't have to, we shouldn't have to communicate around these people because unfortunately they're only encouraged by the algorithms, and those algorithms really shouldn't be doing that. That should be illegal.
Yeah, I will add to Constable's point here. I think the same thing we saw in the creationism evolution debate. Like the debates were, as the debates go up, the acceptance of evolution goes down. It's like how does this happen? Like there are scientists talking like sense and logical and all that stuff. They're all these very like. And they try to pick these people like who are good communicators and stuff to go to these debates and stuff. They try their hardest, and then the public acceptance goes down. It's I really like it, especially as as a person who is like who was in in these debates for a while on internet. Like fighting with the creationists and stuff, like even when I was in my 20s, I can say I don't think it works. I don't think it works. Unfortunately it creates it creates more like people go into camps and they just stay there, and that's the end. And I will agree with Constable that we just need better standards for all of these. Is this so? I don't. But here is the problem. Yes, we need better standards, right? When we are trying to communicate these, and those standards should be easy, but then it's like. There is a problem of free speech in the society overall. Like when you have the problem of free speech, when you start to block somebody from, I'm not talking about the free speech, or I'm not saying, these alt-right people don't have their platforms to talk about. I'm not talking about that. Well, the problem of free speech is mostly directed towards left. Not that I'm leftist. I'm all neo-libertarian, as everybody knows. So it is directed towards left. But here's the thing: when you start blocking someone from speaking, it will come and haunt left over and over again. Like it's an unfortunate fact. So when we are talking about this, we have to be super careful, because it will block the further progress of the society in the long term. I think that's a really fine balance we need to be making, without we should be able to say something like this. Look, creationism is not science. Do you want to teach creationism? Good. Here is the religious classes for the people who want to take them. You can teach it here. Since this is not scientific, scientists do not accept this as a scientific theory, you're gone from science classes overall. Just push them somewhere, let them have their free speech. It's free speech, and have those like the same thing that goes with the like COVID is not real, folks, right? COVID is not real. Do you want to believe COVID is not real? Good. There are religious classes. You can teach them, and just push them there. I think that's the only fine balance we can have. But we cannot say you cannot talk about these. I think it would be wrong for the society, and I think for the leftist causes in the long term. Not that I'm a leftist. Just I underline that. I'm a capitalist. Okay.
I
guess
think,
so.
as it's about what platform you give them, definitely that's why we have media standards. Not that they're always upheld, but yeah, it's about what platform and what airtime and what audience people are given and in what context, I suppose. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean,
So-
for like an issue like environmental destruction, I'm trying to prevent the extinction of the human species. So I figure that if someone is making a business that's installing CNG, clean natural gas from fracking, and he's driving coal businesses out of businesses, the coal fire power plants and stuff like that, and they're going out of business. I think that's a net good. Like that's fine. I don't care that he may or may not believe, or they may or may not like believe in humans are causing harm to the environment. It's still net. I think it's still like a good thing. Or for example, someone that has like a solar panel business or something like that. They're installing solar panels, and that the CEO of that business might or might not actually hold that humans are destroying the environment. But at the end, he's having a business and he's installing solar panels. So I guess my eyes are on the end goal. And I think having like giving an hour to climate change skeptics and then having them have an hour of just unmitigated like free time on air is an awful idea, and then having an hour of someone else coming on, and I think that you have to have someone that's engaging with these ideas and that's actually pushing back. And if you're just allowing them to have your platform, then that is dangerous. Absolutely.
Yeah, but even public debates, when you've got a pro and an anti, the research on the outcome of that shows that people go for climate denial. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter that they're getting equal time where they're talking and debating against each other. Unfortunately. Dan.
Yeah. So I mean, like, I kind of see what Greg is saying though. Like, the anti-vaxxers, I think, are probably a pretty good example of this. Like, I mean, look, I agree with the whole like false equivalency problem. Like, if you give them a platform, you're basically saying their takes are legitimate and weighted as equally as the actual science. I think we all realize that's not the case. But at the same time, if we let these things sort of fester in society at large, they're going to grow and become problems that need to be tackled. And anti-vaxxers are a pretty big example of that right now, right? Where, at least in America, I won't speak for any other countries, but we've got a sizable proportion of the population that's not vaccinated, and they're continuing to perpetuate the pandemic, make it last longer, spread the virus to people who even are vaccinated, or people who are vulnerable and can't get a vaccine for medical reasons. So what we're kind of seeing, especially now with the whole trucker situation in Canada, we're starting to see this group of people that we've kind of pushed off to the side and sort of ignored as pseudoscience now sort of merging with bad faith political actors, and they're sort of becoming one a lot of the time because they have unfortunately a lot of other views in common. But we're now starting to see sort of the anti-vax side of things become this massive like political juggernaut, to the point where politicians are like trying to legislate away all vaccines, not just COVID vaccines, but MMR, Tdap, like very well-researched, effective vaccines. So at that point, like, how politically sort of do we go about trying to even message around that? Like, it's something that has to be addressed, and I think that's kind of what Greg is getting at. Like, we have to do something about it. Maybe that something isn't platforming them and giving them sort of equal weight. But I'll kind of give an example. We were watching on stream on Tuesday that like BBC Question Time episode. It was basically kind of like a town hall. They had a panel of experts, and then they were just taking questions from random folks in the audience. And then the vaccines got brought up and things got testy, but it was like a moderated segment. The moderator stopped, some dude going down a Robert Malone rabbit hole and like kind of kept the discussion going. How constant, Evo, how do you guys feel about sort of a more like structured, regulated conversation, kind of like that? Maybe not about vaccines specifically, but let's say we're talking about climate, right? What about like a town hall of sorts where they get a bunch of people who are either like climate skeptics or just kind of confused as to what else is going on? Give them a chance, give them access to experts to sort of ask whatever's on their mind, right? Because I think that might help sort of get these ideas that might be tangibly harmful addressed, while not sort of saying, yes, Joe Schmo from the audience is just as smart as this climate scientist who's been working on this for 35 years. Mm-hmm. What do you guys think?
So like if you ask me like what we should do, I am a complete science authoritarian. Like, like seriously, I think we should say, like we should say this is scientific, this is non-scientific. We should just dump all the non-scientific stuff to somewhere else. Like non-scientific stuff should not be presented with scientific stuff ever, and they should not be debated in the same environment. Like it's not a conversation for me. Like I mean it. Like it's like do like you think creationism is a thing? It's not the place for science. Just do you think like vaccines cause like I don't know like autism? Yeah, like there's this church over there. You can whine as much as you want, but it is not here. So we should be like I think the issue is like if there is enough, like if there was enough political like incentive to run the science to push the science to the public, I think it would happen. Like if all politicians say, oh, like this is not an issue, like the science is clear on this, the scientists are clear on this, so we are following what they say, it will be followed. We don't have an opinion on this. We cannot have the opinion because they are the experts. Like we fall back on expertise on this issue, then I think anti-vax movement would just go away. Like they would just disappear like nothing ever happened. In the last like 5-10 years, something very interesting is happening. The intelligent design movement has been going away due to two factors. We're not discussing about them anymore. Like seriously. And more importantly, like the Christian, like the Catholic Church is now like giving a green light for like evolution. So like they are just disappearing like crazy. I think that's why it should what should happen. Like the leaders should just go behind science. And it happens with the I don't know. It is complicated though. Like getting the leaders behind science, it's hard. Maybe as humans we deserve to be this way. It's just a shithole.
Evo, aren't we kind of already doing that with like science authoritarianism with publications, where we have we're publishing in these spaces and actually even words, I feel like are a better vessel than, written word is better than like a video, because you can actually portray better things. Like there's charts and all that kind of stuff. I feel like that's so dense, and like, isn't that the default position that we have right now?
Okay. I will give the answer. Real quick. I don't think the scientific elitism is the same as science authoritarianism.
Okay.
So I think that they are different. But like we can discuss that in another time. I don't want to take over. Like Constable, just go on.
Oh no, I was just like, I feel like I disagree with everybody.
Nice.
That's good. That's good.
Hey, no, this is
I
what this is
feel
about.
like
Go for
I
it.
disagree with everybody. I guess I'm making notes because otherwise I forget things. Like, I don't think that, to bring up what's happening with anti-vaxxers and truckers and etc. I guess Homozygote, you kind of said, that's kind of come about because we've pushed them to the side. And I would argue, nope. I would argue that the fact that Joe Rogan has that many people listening to his podcast tells us that they are not pushed to the side. They are just pushed to different ways of communicating that aren't regulated. And so, yeah, that comes back to my point about the problem. I think that, yes, well, I know that allowing them to have a debate between the two sides as if they're equal candidates for truth backfires in our faces, and can backfire in our faces. And so I know that's not the route. I know that, we can't just block people from speaking, because then, as we mentioned, then you are censoring people, and it becomes a big, you're just censoring people, and you're doing the misinformation or the propaganda or whatever. So I don't think not giving the spokespeople for the anti-vax movement the ability to speak on mainstream media is a problem. I think, sometimes the issue is that by addressing something like anti-vax as a big problem in the media, we end up overexpressing how big of a problem and how popular this way of thinking is. And inadvertently, in addressing it, we can even make people go to that cause. I don't think that makes it easy for us to have black and white answers as to how we do this, but I think that should be something else we're thinking of if we have power over a platform. If we're ever the producer of a news program, you should have to think about this. But, we really need to be thinking about, are we addressing an issue, or are we overinflating the issue and therefore fanning the flames? And unfortunately, even if all you're doing is reporting the facts of this person said this and this group on Facebook is doing that, unfortunately, even if you are just coming in with dry facts and not interviewing them or getting them to do a debate, you can still inadvertently recruit people to that cause. So I'm not out here saying this gives us easy answers, but I am here to say that the answers aren't as easy as we often think or dismiss, especially in our community of scientists. I often hear scientists just troubleshooting the issue with misinformation. Just give it a cheeky solution, and often it sounds great, but in practice is really difficult. So I think it does come back to things like, have we deplatformed them, or do they just have a massive platform due to the algorithms and Spotify and stuff like that? Have we deplatformed them, or have we just given them cause to think mainstream media is misinformation and they are the true information? You can't trust anything the government or mainstream media says. So I don't think these things are coming about because they're not getting a platform. Though that's the thing that I would challenge. Evo, some of what you're saying about creationism just makes it sound like people of faith aren't welcome in the lab, and that's something that I would warn against. And I know that's not what you're saying, but I think I just want to do a disclaimer. If you are someone of faith listening to this, please know that we all welcome you, including Evo.
Okay,
Okay,
here's the thing though. Someone of faith is of course welcome in the lab, but someone of faith is not welcome to be come to the lab. we are working on evolutionary biology, and we are not talking about like, oh, did humans come from monkeys or not? Like that's not the discussion there. Like
Yeah.
coming and saying, oh, evolution is not real, like it's not welcome in the lab. I'm sorry. It's like
not relevant to the research.
yeah, it's it's like if someone comes and tries to debate me about like like, oh, you think evolution is real? Here is creation's like like evidence for creation. That is not welcome in the lab. It's like that's the thing.
Separation of church and science.
Yeah, exactly. Just do you want to talk about creationism? There's the church. There's a church. You can do it anywhere in the church. You can. There's a religious class. Do you want to teach about creationism? You are welcome. Like here is the thing for me. I think we should not block people to talk about stuff. But what we should do is like, this is science. This is not science. This is a clear distinction. That's the end. Like there's no like this kind of thinking for me has come when I was thinking about how like why do we fall into these like false science holes and stuff, right? Like I was thinking about this for a while, and I realized like after reading a bunch, of course, like I didn't realize by myself. I was like sitting here and thinking, and I was like, oh, I found something. It didn't happen that way. I was reading from other people, and I realized like a lot of people are talking about human learning, and humans have a need to know. It's like, but it is the need to know is bigger than need to learn. And it's like they don't want to put effort to learn, but they want to know. So the easy knowledge is always like more adaptive in human learning, let's say. Okay, let's talk about the evolutionary terms. So like easy knowledge is more adaptive compared to a harder knowledge. So that's why I think when you give people a choice of picking between a complicated knowledge versus an easy knowledge, it becomes something like, oh, easy. This sounds more plausible. It just fits with everything I know. That's very easy. I just I just leave it to God. God created everything. It's easy. I feel special because God created me, and it's that kind of thinking. That I think when it comes to science, we shouldn't leave that kind of like flexibility to people, because it's not flexible. It's not flexible. It's like science is not. I'm not saying science is not flexible. Science is very flexible, but some of the stuff is not. Okay, the Earth is round. It's not flexible.
Whoa, dude.
Yeah, it's like
No TOS violations, man. Chill out.
Yeah. It's like there's gravity. It's not flexible. So it's like those kind of stuff.
Oh, dare you.
So I don't know.
I think I understand what you're saying. I just wanted to give a moment just in case anyone in chat was like,
I agree with Evo. I think that like there is such good science-based debates that are like they're in the lab, and people are coming at with like different ideas, and like Marcus was talking about, like people in the lab don't agree on pretty much anything. I disagree with a lot of people in my lab about a whole host of things, and there's these like huge, heated, amazing debates that happen constantly in science, and I love that. I want to give more air to that. I did a debate with one of my friends. Like we had debated it like 2 times on whether or not viruses were alive or not, and I was like, I'm just gonna record the 3rd one, and we like went at it, and it was so much fun. And I think that there's good, really, really interesting debates that happen. And because the thing is that people see science and they see it as like this monolith ivory tower thing that's completely inaccessible. And I would love for people to see scientists as more skeptical. They're naturally skeptical, actually. Like if they have a good result in the lab, a lot of scientists are like, how did I mess this up? Like, did I mess up the positive control with what's going on here? Like, I don't think that this is real. And I think that like giving more good-natured science-based debate more time on these platforms, it would do a lot to ease people's ideas about new science concepts too, because they're like, oh, well, scientists have probably thought about my straw man argument that already.
Yeah, and I think like often with science communication, the most popular forms of it, we feel like we have to be like, okay, the science has happened, and now we have the facts, and now here they are. And often, SciComm is something that people see as happens after the results are in, and after there's consensus as well. But yeah, I think having more of that communication of the process of getting there, or even when we're not there as far as consensus, and that's fine, and that's part of science, and it's integral to science. In fact, it is science. So yeah, I like that, Greg. I think that's and going back to our earlier topic, I think that would make SciComm better.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I mean, I think let me wrap this topic up, because there's actually a bunch of stuff that chat's been clamoring, and I think I do want to go back to the climate change discussion, because there's certainly other political stuff I want to work into the discussion here. Yeah, all that I was really saying, Constantly, was that like, especially when it comes to like the Joe Rogans, the anti-vaxxers, it's not so much that we've like artificially tried to depress their numbers, but it's more so we just have like pretended they're not a thing. Even though, like you said, like they have massive platforms. Joe Rogan says all sorts of shit to millions of people all the time. Like, it's more so that we've just decided as a society, and even as a scientific community, that like these things aren't worth our time to like interface with and interact with. And that goes right back to what Greg was saying about like ivory tower mentality. So it's good to see that like we're in agreement,
because they already feel alienated from mainstream science.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a big thing too, like the radicalization of people when they don't have sort of the access to the science, or the access to scientists, or scientists won't talk to them. I think that's really what Greg is trying to get at, is we need to sort of have these conversations and make people feel heard and validated, while also trying to loop them in with like what we know is actually going on, so that way they're not like regurgitating what Joe Rogan and Robert Malone are saying every other week. But to sort of bring a more, like, I guess, explicitly political angle into this, and Evo, you can feel free to decline to answer all of these, you raging capitalist. But yeah, I think before we got into sort of the topic of like communicators, communication techniques, we were sort of talking about how to sort of engage in advocacy for an issue like climate change and environmental crisis. We sort of left that discussion off at sort of talking with politicians, sort of creating a grassroots groundswell among our communities and among people that we know, and hopefully building that up elsewhere. I want to sort of interject a more, I guess, socialist approach, because that's a lot of what goes on in Ministry of Science. We're all pretty reasonably far to the left in a lot of cases, save Evo. So at this point, something like, I don't know, organized labor, for example, like how can we really sort of loop that in to sort of demand better for the climate, to really demand climate justice? How do you see sort of left-wing politics and organized labor sort of folding into what science needs to have happen?
I think the biggest thing that needs to happen to save our species is, and ecology shows this, is that we need to have a lot of animals, a lot of different types. The animals give genetic diversity amongst the population, and then you have a lot of species living in that environment, and that equates to a healthy environment, which gives a lot of environmental services that we have that are going to be integral for human life for millennia on this planet. How that happens is kind of, if we think about it in CO2 ppms, it's this huge, far off, huge thing that's like you have no way of actually impacting, right? It's like what are my trash collection or my any type of the growing out environments inside the local space, how is that going to impact, CO2 ppms? You can't connect those two. But if we focus at the local level and getting people elected that actually share these ideas of, at the local level, wanting to, hey, I want to look at animal populations. I want to track that over time, and I want to increase that animal population over time. I want to increase the amount of species in our environment. I want to connect more of these environmental islands that happen over time because of humans. If we connect all of those, then we're going to have better environments. So how that happens can be at the local level, and in order to do that, like for example, I think there's a big failure of the Green Party in the United States. They haven't been able to actually link any of their national efforts or drives or donations to actually like, hey, we're going to impact this city and we're going to run the city council and we're going to do that. Like, personally, if I think that city council got elected, I would want them to have, local companies that are doing that, and those local companies can be organized however they want. If we have it democratically owned, those companies are less likely to vote for one person to have 3,000 times the wealth. They're not going to vote to have their jobs shipped overseas. So the structure of those companies or the groups or the nonprofits that are made within that local area can be however people want.
Hello. Just unmuting. Sorry, I realized I was muted.
No, you're fine.
No, I was just listening and thinking of the kind of labor angle. There's a great example I came across here in Australia called the Climate Justice Union, which is a workers' union, but it's not an industry-specific one. Any industry can be a part of it, and it really is about unionizing for better working conditions as they relate to climate. And so that might seem a bit vague if you haven't thought about it before, but it's things like, because of climate crisis, you're more likely to have an unsafe work environment, whether that's due to fires, air quality, whether that's due to sick leave because of the impact of environmental crisis on your health, etc., and so forth. And so they're kind of trying to use the workers' union mentality and strategies to really tackle workplace regulations, policies, agreements, etc., as they relate to the climate. And also they're not just for workers in terms of like traditional professions. You can be a representative of a community, like if you're a representative of, for instance, an Aboriginal community who wants to see your worker rights represented so that there's more talk of land rights and traditional ownership and Indigenous cooperation in environmental management in the mining sector and stuff like that. So there are, if that's your brand of socialism and you're into unionising, which good on you, think about whether the unions and those sorts of organised groups that you might be a part of, how they actually factor climate into their remit, if they do. One other thing is that when it comes to how this kind of relates to science, I think science and the labour done in science and the way we don't even have HR in science. Not that HR is a perfect, a response to every issue in other workplaces, but I think, really, I think there's a lot of advocacy work to be done to improve the working conditions of scientists. Also, there are some institutions where scientists are discouraged from talking on controversial topics and things like that, even if it's completely scientific what they're saying. And so, making sure that you're across these policies and able to advocate for change if you need it in your workplaces in science when it comes to your freedom of speech. And I think the other thing, if we're thinking about science and climate as a justice issue, we can look to COP, the International Conference of Parties, happens every year, except 2020 for obvious reasons. But there are many opportunities to make that process more equitable and have more social justice brought to the forefront there. In terms of, who is representative, I know we've talked about diversity in terms of biology and ecosystems, but diversity socially and within our workplaces is definitely important as well. The other thing that when we talk about COP and international climate politics, often we'll be looking at mostly emissions reductions targets, but that's only one element of what COP is about. Another element is that the Paris Agreement was not only about emissions reduction, which is not happening at the rate we all said we wanted to do, or even near it, but also about finance for developing countries so that they can actually mitigate and adapt to environmental crisis that they are most in harm's way over. So if you are interested in international climate discussions and as they relate to socialism, you should really be looking at how far behind we're falling on our very minimal things that we all said we'd do in terms of climate justice on an international level, just even in terms of the amount of money that we said we were going to give. And when I say we, I mean rich Western countries, and I mean rich countries, not just Western countries, but talking to Americans as an Australian, we're doing terribly. So there's plenty, there's plenty of work to be done in terms of a just transition is often the phrase used. And that goes for people in terms of socioeconomic background, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of gender, sexuality. There are so many reasons why any form of social inequity also puts you in further harm in terms of the way you experience climate crisis. So yeah, lots of work to be done is all I'll say. Pick an issue, get busy.
So I think this kind of picks up on sort of what Eva was talking about earlier, and I think what Prof Q, another one of our administrative science panelists who couldn't be on the panel but is making some good points in chat. The notion that we collectively as the scientific community, right? Like we have all this information, we've done experimentation analysis, we have been the ones to sort of reveal the scope and magnitude of the problem, and we're advocates and communicators on how to fix it. But something that we kind of advocate for, and all of you can sort of chime in on this, but it almost feels like we need to take it one step farther and almost have scientists collectively across all disciplines sort of be more representative of those making the decisions and those with the political power to sort of enact what the scientific findings dictate are necessary. So just in general, like, what do you think about the idea of, electing scientists, of sort of trying to integrate scientific ways of thinking in the political arena? Like, how do we, I guess, lobby politicians who aren't scientists to think more like a scientist? That goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, okay, you have that 30 seconds with your Congress critter, you have those 5 sentences, what kind of rhetoric do we even use? So I guess it's kind of like a two-parter. Like, one, should we elect more scientists? Is that viable? 2, for the politicians that aren't scientists who you can't really kind of talk to like a colleague, how do we, I guess, reach them? What kind of things do we say?
Okay, if we have 30 seconds, I think the conversation should go this way. Like there's I'm considering a real 30-second talk here. Okay, this is hello, Senator. This is someone, we are fucked. Here's some money. Please fix it. So that I think that should be our 30 seconds talk. But here's the real here's some real talk. If we don't change our ways completely, our thinking and our approach to the problems in general, from we should burn everything down and start build over again. Otherwise, it's not happening. Yes, exactly, Constable. Exactly. Otherwise, it's not happening because, first of all, the shit we are in right now is due to how we think. It's not due to like this is not something like, oh, we made a mistake here and we made a mistake there and we're in this shit now. No, this is like all the system is fucked and we need to fix this like completely to make any progress to start with. Like otherwise, band-aid here, band-aid there, it won't work. Like I think the if we are talking about the climate, the situation is like really bad. And it's like we cannot let this be something like, oh, okay, let's try to fix this like small angle. No, we need a holistic approach to target everything that might contribute to this. And like my doppelganger sometimes goes on stream and talks about like how we should stop like consumption and all that stuff. They're all part of how we think. That's like if we consume more, like this system is designed to make people consume more. And the people are kind of doomed to consume more, and as they consume more, the cycle I draw every stream, like a lot of people know here what I'm talking about. It just runs more and more and creates more waste, more like it's more emissions, it is more pollution, it's just like more habitat destruction. That cycle is the real key we should target. But that cycle is not just just a single thing. It's how we think right now. It's like who we are as people. It's like what I'm saying is change who you are from the scratch and change everyone with you. Like this is kind of like it's almost like an impossible ask, but we should do it. Otherwise, like we're fucked. It is as clear as that for me. So I like then reaching like if we have that kind of movement, then reaching out to the politicians would be easy. Like it's like a lot of people. If we get the people on board with this idea, then reaching to the politicians would be easier because people would be demanding something to happen like right now. I don't know, that's how I feel.
I mean, I think we can have like a national movement at the federal level where we like elect a president or something like that that's super pro environment, but at the same time, like zoning is at the local level. If you're interested in zoning laws in the United States, like that's at the state, the county, and the city level. So there's a huge opportunity for people to actually get involved there and say, hey, maybe we should have more green spaces. Maybe the green spaces should be connected. We actually have tangible things that we can work on and that we can do. And then we can see, like how does that impact things? Like looking at things scientifically, like how does that impact the amount of pollution that people are exposed to? How does that what are our asthma cases over time? Are they going down? And then those cities that have that push for the environmental push are then kind of seen as like something that we can look to and be like, hey, don't you guys want to have your asthma cases go down in your city and that kind of thing. The national level there's some particular things that are really, really bad at the national level in the United States. Like, for example, the subsidies that oil companies get right now, that just doesn't make any sense. They're some of the most profitable companies in the world. Also, particularly bad is actually the Bill Clinton's bill that actually mandated that ethanol be at 10% in our gas. So that actually links gas prices to food prices in kind of like a really odd way. And it also makes it so that 90% of all farmland in the United States is corn, which is just a really weird, not nutritious product that it's just, it's just very, very odd. Those are particular legislative things. I still think that, I agree in that people have to do what they can, and they have to figure out ways that they can impact it. And this huge invisible thing like emissions is just very daunting for someone to take on personally. Like how that's just such a hard thing to amass, and it's an invisible enemy. I mean, I actually wanted to talk about this, but like with someone that actually does science communication, so this is perfect. Like the idea that the thing that you talk to an anti climate change person, and the number one thing they talk about is CO2 ppms. They're going to talk hockey sticks to you. They're going to talk radio decay of CO2 in the atmosphere, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, at the end of the day, like, I agree that CO2 ppms is a problem. I totally think, but if you're not a geologist or you're not a marine biologist, like, maybe that's not the place that you should be like focusing your energy. Like dead animals, that's a good thing that people can see. The destruction of wetland habitats, 90% of wetland habitats have been destroyed. Like we can see that with our own eyes. We know that that's happening. We don't have to have like this ppm thing, very esoteric, because if you think about it, like, and you think about the whole cascade that happens, the trophic cascade, where CO2 ppms increase, so then global temperatures increase, which means that it's a more inhospitable thing for animals to live, and then animals die, and then humans die. It's like we're already on step 4 right now. There's a huge, massive extinction happening right now with across the entire globe. Like we already are in the worst case scenario for the greenhouse effect, and it's happening right now. I really argue that we're actually going to see more negative impacts to the human species from the destruction of our habitat and the destruction of animals of life on Earth faster than CO2 ppms, which is an esoteric 2 degrees Celsius over the next 50 years, which is a problem. But it's like, we're already in death. We're already in death and destruction. It's already happening, people. And it's actually worse than people think. I mean, going back to like how scientists speak to one another in the debates that we have, like, in the algae biofuels labs that I'm in, I mean, what we talk about behind the doors is actually like way worse. It's actually way worse than people can even comprehend or understand right now. And it's really frustrating as a scientist, because a lot of people see it as like, oh, you're so reactionary, you're inflammatory, like talking about all these things on the media. Meanwhile, like scientists are like, this hasn't been talked about enough. So it's really frustrating. But I think we instead of just grinding our gears at the national level and just hitting our head against the wall, you can just like work locally. And that's what we need to do anyway. And I feel like we can actually have a huge impact.
Yeah, there's absolutely no part of our society and the way it works that doesn't need to change. And therefore, there's absolutely no person who doesn't have some level of influence, no matter what that might be, whether it's in your house, in your local community or beyond. And rather than having that be a daunting thing, I hope we can make that a thing that makes us go, right, pick up our tools and get to work, because yeah, it sounds dramatic when Evo's like, oh, here's your 30-second chat, we are fucked. But that's not dramatic, that's realistic. Going back to what you said too, Greg, and I think you're right. People underestimate. They go, okay, but with the tipping points, and I'm like, they are well behind us. A lot of them are. At the moment, we're not talking about avoiding terrible shit. We're talking about avoiding the worst terrible shit and trying to get things to be shit, but less shit. You know? Like, that's where we're at. And I hope that empowers people.
Yeah, I'm at this point, we know that it is a post-apocalyptic world that's waiting for us. Like we are trying to bring it to a point where we don't have to eat each other. That's the thing we are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, people should read too. Like, don't just trust us. Like, look at the IPCC reports and stuff. Read them for yourself. They actually have executive summaries that are 1-page, 10-page summaries, and it's really interesting. There's been a stark shift in the IPCC reports from 10 years ago. It was very charts and graphs heavy of like kind of like what the future holds in these esoteric numbers and stuff like that. Now we're like looking at, you know, what we can do, what impacts would happen if a country did this, like tangible things that can actually happen. You know, like in simple things like meatless Mondays and stuff like that. It sounds stupid, but it's like, damn, like if we had like a meatless Monday in California, like damn, that would be a huge impact on things. Hey.
Yeah. So,
Dad, one second.
No, you're good. So, you know, part of this, and this was something that was being said in chat. Oh, look at the little guy. He can't hear us.
I'm talking to these people.
Yeah, part of what's being said in chat, I think I kind of agree with this take, is the fact that like politicians, especially, I think, will be sort of a source of this rhetoric. But you know, generally speaking, I'll just start with America because we have the worst brain rot. We are sort of used to sort of just bootstrapping our way through it, right? Like we think that we think that like we can simply just weather the storm, both metaphorically and literally, right? That we can basically just like find out a way to like band together and, you know, survive and not, you know, drown if you're in Florida or burn if you're in the Pacific Northwest. Like people think that this isn't something we need like large societal change to actually address, simply because we'll just deal with it because that's what we've always done, because we're Americans, right? We just take it on the chin because we can't like envision a world that doesn't look like this. So I guess how do you break people out of that mentality of, you know, it's just going to happen, nothing I can really do about it, like let me just weather it and hope for the best? Like how do you, I guess, radicalize people into what we're trying to do in terms of advocacy? And I'll add on to that, how do you radicalize the scientists? Because I know a lot of scientists who like agree with the science. They're like, yeah, we're doomed, but they're so trapped in their fatalism that it's like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and, you know, watch the world burn and that's it. Like, how do you get the scientists to sort of do what we're trying to do? How do you get them in this movement too, to want to communicate, to engage with their communities?
Paradigm shift. I think, first of all, I don't think we should talk about radicalizing people. I think we should start talking about normalizing the radicalization. So it should be the norm. Hear me out, okay? If we are talking about something radical, that means it is something different than the norm. If you make the radical normal, then it's not radical anymore, because radical is something else. So, like, I think I think we should change we should really normalize to be infuriated with the shit going on around us. I think that should be the normal. The normal shouldn't be, oh, I'll take it. You know, like, well, whatever happens, I'll take it. I think that's not the attitude we want. We want people to be infuriated because this is shit. We don't take it anymore. This is not going to go well, and we are here to burn it down. Like, I think that should be the mindset. If it becomes normal, then things will start changing. The second thing is, I think this comes from the legislation that, like, our production cycle is so fucking wrong. It's like so wrong. It's like, this is not sustainable. Like, you know, create something that will last forever. Like the fucking computers, the fucking laptops, right? Like, I don't need a new monitor every time I buy a laptop. What I need is like maybe the main board that needs to change. Just give me the new main board. Like, I'm happy with the fucking keyboard I have. Like, why are you changing that every time I need a new main board? You know, like that. Even the main board. Like, why do we need a new main board? Like, what I need is just a CPU that needs to be changed. Like, those kind of things. This is ingrained in the system. It's like, it's built in the system that every time I need a new CPU, I have to change the fucking PC. That's wasteful. and everything is built to be wasteful. And I'm talking about something we are not buying every day. There are shit like that we have to buy every day, and there are shit we don't have to buy every day, but like once in a while. But they are built so shittily that they break. Like why do you make things to break? Like these are the things we need to be targeting. Like it just, yeah, it's money, but like make things really like, you know, these are the things I use all the time. Make things reusable, repairable, recyclable. If we don't have these three things in the products, I think this won't work. Like, this system cannot go on like this anymore. It's just, I don't know.
Well, I mean, in that vein, Evo, like, we're gonna shelve the leftist memes for just a second, but like what you're describing is an intrinsic failure of capitalism, right?
Exactly.
Where
It's consumer
everything
capitalism.
everything is built to appease consumer satisfaction and not necessarily structured in a sustainable way, and that, of course, accelerates the processes that we have enough scientific evidence to know are ongoing. At least, you know, Chad has chimed in and says there are some efforts to sort of be more sustainable in the particular example you gave about laptops, but you know, they're not going to have venture capitalist backing and advertisement to really like get traction. It's really solely reliant on word of mouth. So I guess that kind of brings in what you were saying, right? Like we need to sort of normalize the notion of prioritizing sustainability in everything we do, whether it's our food consumption, whether it's our purchasing habits, whether it's, you know, whether we decide to drive somewhere or perhaps walk or take a bike instead. Like, obviously, you know, there are things we can do on an individual level, but at the same time, like, just like you said, Evo, that system is built to push the responsibility down to the individual. We're starting to see the same thing with COVID right now, but this has been something that's been said about climate change and environmental crisis for a very long time, that, you know, if you just eat one less hamburger, climate change wouldn't be happening. And yeah, that's a good thing. We should not like eat a bunch of meat, but that's not going to prevent large multinational corporations from actually not polluting, not being wasteful, and not exacerbating climate change for their pocketbooks. So, you know, at that point, this is why we like to talk about politics, because it comes back to a political core issue at the end of the day. And I guess maybe we can fold that into our advocacy, right? We can sort of talk about the science and how the IPCC literally said, and I think either their most recent report or the one before, they literally said the phrase capitalism is unsustainable. Like, that's something kind of unheard of from groups of scientists, where they directly call out a mode of economic organization, and they're right. Like, they're absolutely right. So maybe that's a template for communication going forward. We have to structure these conversations in a more political way, because we can establish trust and rapport about the science, about the facts. But we need to take people almost a step farther. We need to help them realize that this goes way beyond science. This isn't just a bunch of people in lab coats trying to like fix a problem that's really urgent. We have to have everybody. Like, this takes everybody across all the different levels, from local to in Washington, D.C. So, Evo, like, yes, you're absolutely right. We have to try to radicalize people in ways that might make your citizenship be in jeopardy, to reinvoke the leftist memes.
Just disclaimer: capitalism is great.
But like, how convenient is it that consumer capitalism has given us the solution for climate change being everyone buy a new car? It just has to be electric vehicles this time. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's ridiculous. And it has the same problems as gas, actually. Electric vehicles do, because like gas has the same, like gas is mined from a place that you're not living at. And then when you use it, it goes into the environment that you don't see the exports of. And then on top of that, the problems, you're not living where they're necessarily the most impacted. It's the same with electric vehicles, where you're not living it where they're mining the rare earth minerals. You're not when you're driving your Tesla, if you're plugging that thing in at the end of the day, and you're plugging it in and getting electricity from a coal-fired power plant, it's literally the exact same thing like driving down a train that's a coal-fired train down the road. And then on top of that, at the end, the impacts, the batteries have serious waste problems. There's actually like huge problems with recycling them and that kind of thing. I'm just very skeptical of electric vehicles in general, and I feel like this is like a solution that's been given to us from these car companies that now are able to do electric vehicles, and they're it's kind of like what you're talking about with the Astro green tech that's like fake green kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I okay. Oh, you go, Constable.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think some of the, like, all of these problems we need to be able to talk about and show that we as people within this movement recognize them, is one thing I will say. The other thing is we also need to at the same time remember that fossil fuel companies love it when there's a chink in that, and they actually try and exploit that for climate solution delay. So we need to be aware of that. All at the same time. And I think, it goes to, we need electric public transport. And yes, we'll still have lithium batteries. And yes, that means that we can't just install the chargers if we aren't also installing the renewable energy for those chargers and the recycling plant that can deal with every single bit of material for our electric bus and everything else. Because otherwise we are going to lower our emissions but continue the environmental crisis just in other ways. And I agree, like, we need to do that. And going back to what Ivo said, I say, I actually wrote down, normalize shaming rich people into doing better things with their money. Normalize shaming the powerful people into action. Shaming people become very powerful. I mean, a big bit of ding shame from the public can go a long way.
I like the idea of having the full cycle, all on house kind of electric vehicle thing. I'm gonna just like plug, and I'm completely biased here. I'm gonna plug algae here as a solution for this problem, because we can actually keep the gas stations, we can keep the tanks, we can keep everything that we have right now. It's just that basically instead of using 700 million year old plants and algae, we're using algae that we're growing today, and it's completely sustainable, renewable. We don't have to buy new cars. People in my generation our generation don't want to buy cars. So now we're supposed to buy a new car, an electric vehicle car. I'm very skeptical of that. And the metric that people used back in like 2011 that I had heard was basically we could go completely renewable in the United States through algae biofuels with an algae pond the size of Texas. So there's two real reactions to this. One, it's like, that's ridiculous. We're never going to have algae ponds that are that big. Two, I'm like, wow, we actually have a number for that, and it's not like the size of the United States. That's incredible. And if we're talking about, sustainable practices, then maybe we shouldn't be growing corn on 90% of our farmlands. Maybe those people can grow algae instead, and we can actually have domestically made fuel for everyone, and my 92 Ford Ranger can become a renewable vehicle, and we don't have to have all and build through these infrastructure. We're already having a big problem with that. I mean, we're talking like $2 to $3 trillion in tanks, in pipelines, tankers, all that kind of stuff. It's like, it's not something that we have to develop, that in the future batteries are going to be coming better, so maybe we can do this. It's like, no, we have all the technology and we have everything we can do right now. We have it all. All the technology is there. It's just the implementation that Marcus is talking about. It's the politics. Why aren't algae biofuels actually being subsidized instead of like these oil companies? It just doesn't make any sense.
Greg, I have a question to you. So, like, regarding the biofuels. Mm-hmm. So when we are using biofuels, we are still using a combustion engine. Yeah. With, like, there will be some level of emissions. I think will there be 2 levels of emissions or 1 level of emission? Because like what's the production level of emissions from the biofuel production, and what's the combustion level of emissions from using biofuels compared to the fossil fuels.
Yeah, so I mean, you do have.
I'm not trying to attack you. This is complete curiosity.
Yeah, the good question. No, so basically you're still burning lipids, right? Which is what our fuel is. It's the lipids of these, plants. In algae, it would actually be the lipids would be carbon that's in the environment right now. So the carbon's being sucked out of the environment into these lipids, and then it goes and combusts right into the environment. The difference between that and what we're doing right now is we're basically sucking carbon out. That's old carbon. That's in ecology, this is called a sink, where a carbon sink, where that carbon's supposed to stay there. It's not supposed to be recycled for hundreds of millions of years. And now we're exporting that carbon right to the atmosphere. And that's kind of like the problem from an emissions standpoint. The big problem with algae in that kind of cycle, which what you're talking about, is basically turning the algae from algae into usable oil. And the biggest problem with that right now is actually removing water from the system because they're living in water. And by the way, they can actually live in wastewater, which is kind of a cool idea. We don't have to have fresh water, which is a finite resource. A lot of people don't realize that. Fresh water is finite on Earth. And we can reuse wastewater, and then removing the water and then extracting the lipids and making the fuel is the biggest problem. But there are a lot of engineering companies actually that are trying to use hydrolysis and a lot of different chemical reactions to remove, take it all off without boiling the entire thing, right? Because if you boil it, that's a lot of energy loss, and the carbon footprint goes astronomically higher.
Yeah, I think what we end up with, what I really want us to end up with is that we have consensus in society at all levels and people at all levels of wealth and influence that we need to mitigate climate change and adapt to what we've already put in place. What happens next, and what is already happening, is the debate of what are the best methods. And we need to be aware that capitalism has many horses in that race as well. And so, we can end up, I know, Greg, you've mentioned earlier, we ended up with this policy that meant this, and then we got all these cornfields. We won't automatically end up with the most optimal system unless we advocate for what that might look like. We need to keep in mind that that will mean, stopping fossil fuels at the same time as implementing solutions and having that debate all at the same time, because otherwise we're not going to make it. But I think sometimes when I talk about these things and the different types of renewable energy and alternative energy sources, sometimes you get people in chat, for instance, who have their one favorite thing. Mm-hmm. They're like, nuclear or die, and you're like, okay, cool, that's part of it. And so I think one of the things that makes it challenging for us as human beings to think about is that it's also, while this is a global issue, we are all living in very different geographical and socio-political parts of the world, which also means different natural resources and different political and societal norms and contexts. So often, I've had to watch myself too when I'm like, oh, well, this makes sense. And then I'm like, does that make sense everywhere? Or does that make sense in Australia or America? Or and it's really, I don't have a black and white thing to tell you, but I guess just to call out to the community listening that we need to be ready to really listen, even if someone's talking about not our favorite horse in the race. And we need to also be aware that the fossil fuel industry is trying to have their own horses in the race. Like at COP26, the Australia Pavilion had a sponsored display by Santos, which was all about coal seam gas and carbon capture and storage. Um, and we also have a lot of people who are wanting to invest in future technology when, like Greg said, there's so much technology that is here and now and ready. And I think, yeah, we do need to invest in things for the future and improving things, whether that's a battery or whatever. We do need to do R&D on all of the issues that currently exist with our various technologies, but we can't let that get in the way of implementing the ones that are here and ready to go, like you were saying. I think it's a lot to expect our audiences to keep in mind, but I suppose if we all think of it ourselves, we can have those conversations with the people around us.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about, like, there are use cases for combustible fuels, like, even because if you think about air flight, it's just literally impossible to have a battery powered or electric vehicle with current technologies, I should say, that's powered by a motor with batteries. It's just the amount of weight that they have, and then having to have more batteries because it's more weight, and then you have batteries because of the batteries, and it's an infinite loop of, it's just not possible. I think that nuclear, it's an all of the above approach. I agree with you. I think that nuclear is really good in countries where they don't have land. So, like, for example, if you're like Taiwan or something like that, you're not going to have all this real estate in order to have solar panels, or, well, maybe solar panels on top of their buildings, but they're not gonna be able to power they're too energy dense. They're not gonna be able to power everyone's devices based off of just like solar and wind and geo and all those kind of ways that we can do it. So, in those specific use cases, then yeah, of course there's going to be some nuclear energy that's used. But, for places like the United States, like nuclear being our predominant energy source just doesn't make any sense, because we have all that space, we have all this area that we can use for, algae, for wind, for solar, for all that kind of stuff. So it just doesn't make as much sense, in my opinion, as in other countries. Like it does, like it really makes sense in the United States to use the renewable technologies.
And I guess no matter what, we're always talking about a just transition, whether you want to move away from coal or whether you want to change the energy mix with nuclear. Like, we're always talking about just transitions. We're always keeping in mind, if we do X, does that mean that in the meantime we do more fossil fuels, which sometimes is the argument against, that people have against decommissioning nuclear, is they're like, oh, but renewables won't fill the void, fossil fuels will. And I mean, that's a potential thing we need to be aware of and talk about, but that doesn't have to be so. There are so many potential futures, everyone.
Well, so I guess, like, on that note, like, as it pertains to nuclear power, I feel like I see memes both for and against and in between all the time about nuclear power. Like, it almost feels like it's almost as radicalized as like vaccines at this point, but like within people who want to do something about climate. So, like, I know nothing. Like, I will readily admit I am a big idiot when it comes to nuclear power. I know, like, nuclear powered bombs, like that's about as close of a connection as I can make, as Fukushima and Chernobyl and nukes. Like, is nuclear power actually like a viable solution, regardless of whether we should or shouldn't? Like, is that a thing that is sustainable? Because I don't know enough about that to really like comment.
For Australia, it's not in the time frame we need it to be to do what we need to do what we said in the Paris Agreement. That's what I know to be the case, because self-confessed bias towards Australia perspective, because that's what I'm immersed in. But in the Australia perspective, maybe if we had started, we don't have any nuclear, I should say. Zero nuclear here currently up and running.
Wow,
and I don't think, and I think often I notice that the conversation on climate change and what we should do about it, especially in English-speaking media, is dominated by the American perspective. And that means that sometimes here in places that aren't America but speak English, we end up inadvertently in our environmental movements absorbing lots of information that is true and awesome, but that's from data of this America, which is useful and sometimes is in line with similar case studies here, but not always the case. And that goes for agriculture and different systems that we have that work differently here. And so with nuclear, I wouldn't poo-poo it everywhere in the world, but I know in Australia, where we are now with zero nuclear, and given this is the critical decade for action, no, nuclear is not the answer for Australia. And yes, we have plenty of other natural resources at our disposal. And yes, we do also mine a lot of uranium here, so our economy does benefit. If you want to be old capitalist about it, Evo, our economy does benefit from nuclear elsewhere.
I mean, I think the biggest problem that I see with nuclear is that it's not renewable. I mean, so there's just, you're not able to renewably make that energy. And when you do make that energy, there's a couple of problems with it. You're going into batteries technology development, which is not where it needs to be, because batteries have an inherent problem where they're holding a charge by a chemical gradient, and you have to create that chemical gradient, and it has to stay there. And over time it wears down, and there's electrons that flow, and it's just, it just happens. The nice thing about fossil fuels or algae biofuels is that it's a fungible fuel, that it's called. So a fungible fuel is something where the inherent energy of the fuel is actually between the bonds. And if you take that fuel, you take a milliliter of gas from here or on the space station or wherever it is, it's still going to have that energy within the bonds, and it's going to hold that energy over time. So that's a huge benefit to fossil fuels or lipid-based fuels.
So since we are talking about nuclear, with the nuclear, the biggest problem we have is like, okay, this is how it works. For the chat, it's the easiest way to explain it is like this: if you have a nuclear rod, when the rod goes to 95% of its power, like you use 5% of the uranium inside, that rod is getting replaced. I mean, like it's like you're going to get gas, you use like 5% of your gas, dump everything out, then fill the tank again. It's like, what the fuck? It is crazy.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, there are now they're trying to make this like recycling process. There's a lot of work like put onto that, and there's some success too. That might change the nuclear game once and for all, because that means the rods are not getting dumped out. Like after they went to 95% or 90%. I don't remember the exact rate, but like it's something that crazy. Like they will be replaced. Like they will be replaced, and then the old rod will be recycled. That 90% will be going back to another rod, and that means apparently that means US, with the nuclear reactors they have, and with the rods they have, uranium they have, wouldn't need like extraction of uranium for 25,000 years. So that like, I mean, that is like, if it happens, that's a crazy development on that end. So like there's some research going into that end. So like that's interesting.
And I mean, disclaimer, I'm also wanting to point out that a lot of people are like, oh, there's I mean, I'm not reading chat right now, but I'm sure there's lots of chat happening. A lot of people are pointing out smaller nuclear reactors and other ways of nuclear. Disclaimer, I don't know enough about it, and I'm not pro or anti-nuclear. I guess I've just been head down, bum up, trying to focus on Australia and what we can do here, acting locally, and that's probably why I'm so ignorant about nuclear.
Yeah, I mean, there's like the nuclear proponents. It's like this weird, like, oh man, like nuclear reactor submarines. Like we can all have small nuclear reactors, maybe in our cars, and so it's like okay, like all right, maybe, like, but we have a solution right now. Like we have solutions right now, and it's not happening. So like, how is that going to be implemented? And now I have to buy. I just bought a Tesla electric vehicle. Now I got to buy this stupid, like nuclear reactor car too. Like, how many cars are we going to go through?
No, that's definitely true. Like we shouldn't. So here's the thing, with the change of like the technology there, that is environmentally friendly if you ask me, because we don't need to do more mining. So I think that's a solution. But like as Greg is saying, I'm not asking for like small nuclear reactor car too. Like it's about like it's whatever I have, make me use it for years without like a problem. Like I make it so that I don't need to replace it like every 3 years. That is I think that's the real question we need to be answering. Like, how can we make things last long for everyone?
Yeah, exactly.
And how can we see things as a resource that, rather than waste? How can we make it so that there's nothing you can buy that can't, at its end of life, as in the end of you using it as an individual, that can't then go back into the cycle? How do we make that an integral thing of absolutely everything we do, every material thing that is created? At the moment, there is zero responsibility for companies that create things to have any stream or idea or care in the world for what happens to them when they're no longer useful to someone. And it's just broken.
Yeah, I can think of a great example of that immediately would be food, right? Where it's like so much of food is wasted, especially in the United States, where I used to work at Starbucks, and you're just throwing away so much food, and it's like, why? How is that possible that it's profitable? Well, like Starbucks sells those things at a high enough profit margin that they can throw away 90% of it and still make a profit on it. We had at our Starbucks, we would collect them, and then weekly there would be like a donation drive to the local church or whatever that could, a homeless shelter that could give the food away. A lot of the Starbucks workers were like eating it for like free meals and stuff like that. So it wasn't necessarily being wasted or thrown away, but you see these videos, like I saw one, was it like Krispy Kremes or something? And it was just like a full trash can every night. It's like, it's so disgusting, because we have such a problem right now with food deserts, people going, like, even though they might not be like going home, like going to bed like hungry, maybe like in like 30-year ago notion of like being starving, but like they're not eating nutritionally well, they're not being satiated. I think that there's like so many of these ideas and these things that we're noticing, and it's like, I don't understand why there can't be more like engineering focus. Like, it's an engineering problem what we're talking about, right? Taking things from some place, putting them to somewhere else without wasting it. It's just an engineering problem. So it's like, throw it to like a local city or something. See, like, have their with a engineering PhD, like have their PhD be like engineering the local food, recycling program or something like that. And like, I would love to see universities pair with their local city governments a lot more, or even at all right now, to actually give research ideas and to actually address and research solutions to these problems that we're having.
Yeah, and this goes
and
back
to implement them. Oh, sorry.
No, you can go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to quickly say, and to implement them, it's a shame that one of your biggest barriers will be the organizations, the corporations that create these issues, because they actually profit from that deficit and inequity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this goes back to what Consta said, I think, pretty close to the start. was the fact that like we have to be very interdisciplinary with how we solve these issues. We're missing all of our sociologists from the panel and our PhD in information sciences, who also does philosophy on the side. Shout out Gwyneth. But you know, like you said, Greg, right? A lot of those issues you described to have engineering at their core. Like we ideally would throw some money at that problem, get engineers on the case, and work together with a local community to create solutions for that. It feels like that scientific way of thinking, that scientific approach to that problem is very much absent, even as Consta describes, in a system where profit reigns supreme, where that notion of corporations walking all over us because it makes them money and that they can freely do that without consequence. You know, a lot of why people don't necessarily sort of take on that charge of going after these corporations is because they feel like there's no alternative. Like, what are we going to do? Like, what is the other reality going to look like where, you know, Amazon isn't delivering me 30,000, you know, rubber ducks every day because I feel like I can do that because capitalism, you know, we both have rubber ducks to speak to that literally. So, you know, it feels like when we're doing this sort of local community advocacy, something we could all maybe keep in mind and incorporate into how we talk is that, you know, we need to rope in our experts. We need to drag them out of the ivory tower and allow them to sort of be part of those communities that helped establish the tower in the first place. And that way everybody's better for it. We're democratizing the knowledge, we're applying it locally in a community to solve problems. And hopefully we can repeat and replicate all of that and sort of build a greater foundation upon which we can then leverage to say, look, the science works. We have these problems. All of these scientific solutions have gotten us to where we need to be. Let's scale this up. We need to go society-wide. Politician, listen, like if we don't have those sort of proofs of concept in terms of how we can apply it at the local level, for having those conversations with the politician, they're gonna be like, oh, okay, give me an example. Like, has this worked before? Is this viable? And if we can't point to something, then, well,
Exactly.
we're out of luck.
Exactly. And this is totally doable by looking at like how science is funded, where you have like NSF, you know, program managers and that kind of stuff, and them trying to direct and fund local actions that can actually benefit, you know, the benefit from research. So you have the NSF saying, okay, hey, we're going to make a, you know, $10 million grant on local research initiatives. Those people go out and then they do that research. The scientists or engineers apply for those grants. They get money from it. They do the research. And then once you have that, like, let's say that, oh, you have the engineering approach to fix this food problem, or is to help people get access to it from this way, yada, yada, yada. And then, I mean, thinking democratically as a democratic approach, then it's like, if that politician or if that mayor doesn't enact that change, I mean, damn, what fire that is to bring in the next election and say, dude, this guy isn't like even, or this person, I should say, isn't even doing anything, isn't enacting this change that's actually going to alleviate, you know, people that are, you know, that need food in our own city. Like how is that not a problem? I mean, that is like a, you know, that's a huge weapon, I guess, to use democratically in an election or something like that. And it'd be very hard to defend not using the, you know, the thing that's just been found to help your specific city in your specific area.
Although I'd say that politicians are already those people, and we already have examples of that. We already have so many examples where the politician hasn't implemented the solution put on their plate. And part of the reason for that is because just because something is scientifically possible does not make it socially and politically possible. And that's why I think that engineering problems and engineering solutions are often social problems that need social solutions. And it's unfortunately why so much ingenuity in STEM ends up sitting on a shelf, going nowhere. It's not because the science isn't solid. It's not because they haven't solved the problem. It's because people are profiting off that problem not being solved. And so I guess this comes back to, we need that. You're absolutely right. I agree. We need that engineer. We need that happening, and we need those people to hold them to account. But like Ivo said, we also need to normalize or it might have been you, homozygote. One of you said, normalize what is seen as radical, normalize that, because I think unfortunately, like, corruption abounds, and there are so many examples of scientific solutions being available, and the fattest checkbook coming in saying, no, if we solve that, I won't have a business, and buying political will, or the lack of political will. You can buy a lot of lack of political will to solve problems. And I don't want this to end up being like a doomerism, but I guess this is me just saying, we need multidisciplinary teams. We need to stop looking at engineering problems as just engineering problems if we're not also socially engineering, because we can have great genetic engineering of food that would solve a lot of health issues, that would solve a lot of water use issues, that would solve a lot of disease issues, chemical use issues. We can have all these wonderful, just using genetic engineering of crops as an example. But if you haven't got a society that is listened to and ready and willing and able to implement those solutions, then you may as well have not done the science at all.
So I would also add, I think, like what you're saying is correct. But I think we should really focus on the socioeconomic, like, justice and equity between people. So, like, one of the biggest problems with the environmental crises is that the crisis is basically created by us. Like, I mean, like, the people who are living, like, the people with the resources. If I can stream right now with all of you, that means I have a lot of resources. Okay, like that means I'm at the top, like 2% of this society or something. And we are using a lot of these resources, but the people, like, who don't have any access to any of these resources are paying the price really bad. Like, I mean, the people in, like, in African countries who are, like, like living in really poor conditions, they are paying a huge price. So, like, that is also something we need to focus on. And, like, this is, if we cannot create an equal society at every level. Now, I'm not talking about just a national level, because if we just talk about the national level, like, that will not solve the problem. That's the saddest part. Like, let's say you bring the national level to, like, an equal society. That's great, for everyone living in that nation. But if there is a class difference between nations, like, the problem is still there. We are not solving the problem. We are just pushing the problem to another level that people don't see. I think it's not a real solution at that end. Like, what I'm trying to say is basically we need to focus on, like, the social justice issues, but in the, like, most global level we can think of, because otherwise the mechanisms that are feeding this system will still be there.
So, like, a new world government, the global new world government.
Maybe, I don't know. Like, yeah. Or UFP,
Brother, you told me you were going to be doing this.
I mean, I guess, like, ideally, like, it's kind of like how would we figure it out in, like, a utopia, like a utopian dream scenario, where I would love to, like, oh man, I would have all this stuff. Like, we wouldn't have to like, to convince politicians. It would be a technocracy, and you'd have all these data driven, it would be basically science by legislation by science, right? Where you research a problem, and then that's figured out how to be done, and then that's just what is done. You don't have any type of, like, representative to have to convince. But I mean, it's just kind of like, well, what we're dealing with now. And I feel like at the local level, you'd be very surprised at how much influence, how much one like Republican and Democrat like isn't even mentioned, just like on this panel, which has been really nice. But you don't have that like political infighting that kind of that is so stagnant, and you just kind of have that two heads just doing nothing, bashing against one another, doing nothing at the national level, versus at the local level where you can, I talked to my mayor of my city that was retired, and he'd been mayor for 30 years, and I was like, man, why didn't you like actually go for governor? Like you could have done that. You were and he was like, why would I ever want to become governor? I actually have less power over what actually improving the material condition of the people that live here. He's like, I could go walk around this city and show you 30 projects that I spearheaded and that we did that actually improved people's lives and actually made a difference to people. So why wouldn't I want to do that? And I was like, dang. It really changed my mind, because you have, at least in the United States, these Republican, the GOP is so focused on the local level and state politics. And I was for so long looked at the national level as like this thing where it was like, well, that's where the solution is, obviously, because that's where all the money is, right? And it is where the power is ultimately in the Constitution of the United States. But man, even, the Bernie Sanders campaign where there's, talking about becoming president. But if you actually listen to Bernie Sanders, the Bernie Sanders campaign for president wasn't actually about making Bernie Sanders president. It was about millions of people all across the country coming together, like that's what the actual movement was. And it was actually getting people involved at City Hall, getting people involved in these boards and commissions. Like right now, if you actually go to your city hall in the United States and look for open boards and open commissions and committees, there's openings everywhere, and they might not be like on the zoning commission because that's a hot ticket item, but like, man, our local library, for example, our library commission does $3 million a year of budget allocation. That's a huge difference, and I live in a city with 300,000 people, and that's a huge difference. And it's just open spots that you can go in and you can walk on, and we're talking maybe 5 or 6 hours a month of actual like being in there and actually in the committees, and you actually have a vote and you can actually vote to change things.
Yeah, I think I would agree from an Australian perspective here. Like, Australia got a lot of praise for our not this year, not late last year, but early on 2020, Australia got a lot of praise for our dealing of COVID, and a lot of that was to do with state governments, not our federal government. And I mean, we have much fewer states. We've got like 6 plus 2 territories, so there's less to deal with than American states as many. But yeah, I think, and when I go to local council and like you were mentioning mayors and stuff like that, I think there's a lot of good that can be done. And also there's a lot of things I think we take for granted in our communities, walking around here. I'm near the coast, and then I'm like, why are they knocking that down and putting that up? And I'm like, well, the local council approved that development. But, there's also the potential to not do that to that wetland area, like there's, I think that's a really good point, Greg. I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's a lot more power to be grabbed than potentially those of us in science are used to thinking about. I think, we brought up earlier, should scientists be politicians? I would say, yeah, I think we need more different disciplines represented in our politicians. And it's like, how do we get politicians to think like scientists? And it's like, maybe we need more scientists to think like politicians. Not in a negative way, but in a way where it's like, maybe I could have real world influence on that. And often a lot of the people I know in science, we end up getting kind of, we're in our own silo. We're not really in the same rooms, in the same meetings, dare I say, listening to the same jargon, because we talk about science having jargon, but business, economics, politics, you know, it all comes with its own jargon and in groups and people in the know about how you get in the door. And I think, yeah, it'd be great to have more scientists on, whether it's boards or local councils or whatever. Being a Leslie Knope, to use a pop culture reference.
All right, so I think that's a pretty good note for us to bring the conversation to a meaningful close. It's been almost 3 hours. I just want you guys to like take stock of that. It's been almost 3 hours, so time flies when you're having good conversation. I'll go ahead and maybe go around the horn for some final thoughts, and in your final thoughts, feel free to shout out your channel, plug something if there's something that you're very passionate about, you want to make people aware of. That would be the time to do it. So I'll go ahead and start with our first guest, Constababble. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a Twitch channel. It's called Constababble, which is my name up here, I think. So I do weekly SciComm streams. I normally do a poll on Twitter with some topic options for the week. So last week, I think it was like vaccine hesitant, like pick an audience and we'll look into some of the research of some of the best practice of how to talk to them. And yeah, so we cover different SciComm topics and try to delve into seeing if there's any research on different examples of best practice, or if there's any expert opinion and articles or things like that we can look at. Yeah, feel free to follow. As far as things to plug, here in Australia, it is, because it's Friday, it is International Day of Women and Girls in Science. So remember that's tomorrow for everyone else not in this time zone or on this Friday. Maybe you are getting towards Friday actually now. Yeah, so this evening at 6 p.m. AEDT, or Sydney Melbourne time, I'll be hosting a virtual discussion on the National Youth Science Forum and the Ambassador for Women in STEM for Australia, their Facebook pages. So if you want to come along, there'll be a panel. I'll be interviewing the Australian government's appointed Ambassador for Women in STEM on that, and I've got a couple of other awesome panelists. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Eva, go ahead.
Okay, it took a while to turn on my microphone. I have a Twitch channel too, Evil Aussie. You have my name there. And now I'm trying to get my PhD, so I only stream one day, and I do marathon streams. Like this week, I will be streaming 12 hours straight, and we will be talking about like evolution, because this Saturday is Darwin's birthday, so we are having a birthday stream. So yeah, like I'm really like into the discussions about the environment and the solutions to the environmental problems. That's like half of my stream. How half of my stream goes normally, not this week, but in real. I have a small doomer community. You are welcome to join. So yeah, we have doomer talk. We have doomer talk, but we don't have nihilist talk. So we are doomers, but we are not nihilists. We look for solutions. And yeah, that's it.
All right, Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel, thepeer.review. If you just type that in, it'll come up. I in general, like I'm so optimistic about the future. I really am. Like it's I feel like technological innovation like never stopped during COVID, and that was such a cool thing. Maybe it's a labor problem. Maybe we could talk about that. But it's like research never stopped, and it really cool to see science and technology just like being used in this new RNA vaccine. I was so pumped, man, when they said that they're going to use an RNA vaccine, you know, because I'd been reading about it and stuff, and it was so cool. Like, wow, they're finally using this technology that's been developed over the last 20 years and stuff like that. Really bummed that it became this political thing, but yeah, like in general, my channel and what I'm trying to do is trying to like science outreach and try to talk about the cool things that are happening to science. So like I have a that our virus is alive debate on there, and then I also have that XXX illicit material you won't find anywhere else. Me debating an anti-vaxxer, contributing to the harm. But yeah, I think it's just there's so much cool stuff happening in science, and if you feel like you're down and you feel depressed, like you can't make a difference in the world, don't focus on the world. Focus on your city and go to your city council and try to make tangible impacts and material differences in people's lives, and you can do that there.
Awesome. I think that's very much a hopium kind of message that we would all feel pretty good on ending on. So first of all, thank you to everybody. Consta for being our guest, Evo for being our guest and community member as well. Thank you for being you. And then Greg, thank you for pinch hitting for some of the other folks from the ministry. You are, of course, more than actually, I'll extend this invitation to all three of you. If you want to be ministry panelists in the future for future guests or future discussions, that is certainly something that you are free to do at your leisure. So
cool, thanks,
you just say the word in the Discord and we'll find a way to work you in. As far as next week, we haven't really ironed out a guest yet. We've had a whole bunch of people we've been trying to like get into contact with, and we haven't been able to actually like get them, in one place for long enough to schedule. So it might be sort of just an internal discussion. Maybe we're debating, maybe we're just kind of shooting the breeze. We'll see. It might be a game time decision as to what we do, but still intend to plan on having Ministry of Science next week. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Please go ahead and
read and wrap.
Yeah, always shout out Read and Rap,
the
human who carries this segment and many other segments and many other streams on his back. The science homie, as it were. We love you, Read and Rap. Thank you for being you. All right, I'll go ahead and let all of you go. Stay safe, and we will certainly be in contact, I imagine.
All right, cool, man. Have a good stream.
So much.
Adios.
Bye. See ya.
Cool. I think that went well. That was fun. Nice. All right. Peace.